Okay, so I did a whole video on all the Power Rangers, Morphers, and whatnot, but I had omitted the Battlizers because it's a long, complicated mess of things. Because the Battlizers are not just like one thing. A lot of people consider some things Battlizers, other things Battlizers. The Battlizers don't even have toy versions of all of them all the time. Also Battlizers can be really cheap because they're just simple repaints of the existing Morphers from the TV show versus something more original. And then we have the whole, do we count, a lot of other things as Battlizers? Like, for example, I would have really liked to count the Dragon Shield from MMPR as a Battlizer. But the problem is you really can't, because then if you do, then you have to count things like the Defender Vest, for example, because the Defender Vest functions pretty much the exact same way. So there's a lot of things that count as Battlizers that people don't agree with. And since there's no toy version for every single Battlizer, I have to count some of the suits as, as part of the review. So in this case, I'm going to be reviewing the Battlizer Morpher itself and the suit armor for all of them as well, just to be fair for all of them. And there'll be some suits that I'll count as Battlizers, even though some people may not even consider them as Battlizers. All right, so we're going to first start off with the very first Battlizers that we got was in Power Rangers in Space. Now, of course, the Battlizers are primarily made for American audiences, and they don't really have a Super Sentai counterpart, except in recent times, with a few exceptions. And we had created the idea from the Battleyzer that was actually one of the wrist-mounted abilities from Mega Ranger. So where do I rank Andros's Battlizer Morpher and his suit? Now, I do like the Battlizer Morpher itself. It's a really cool thing. It kind of looks like a rocket, keeping with the aesthetics. It is fairly simplistic. It just has 1, 2, and 3. And since it's pretty much, follows the Japanese toy, they didn't do any additional stuff to, like, the sound effects and stuff to, like, hear a Battlizer sound effect. So it just does what the original Japanese toy. And it did also get a artisan updated version that came with the original digitizer and the artisan line as well. Overall, I'm going to say it's a B. As for the suit, I thought the suit was okay. Now, it could be kind of cheesy because, again, it was very rubber. It had this whole muscle suit, which, again, usually clashes with Power Rangers. We usually don't, have that in the suits, so it does look kind of cheesy in that regard. But I did like its flight mode, and, of course, it had all the targeting stuff, so that was cool. The one thing I personally never liked about Battlizers is the fact that it usually is a Red Ranger exclusive power-up. I never really cared for that. I mean, I like power-ups for Rangers, and I think in general having like unique power-ups per Ranger is cool, but I personally wish all Battlizers were team-wide, meaning not like the Lights of Orion where they can all be used simultaneously. I like them being an exclusive for each Ranger, but they can be used for all of them, and then the Battlizer would have additional functions that would be determined by the user to make it more unique rather than just simply like a color swap. But overall, I think as a very first Battlizer, it did an okay job. Now, after In Space, we had Lost Galaxy, and we did not get the Battlizer in a form of a toy. And I actually would have liked that, the Red Armor Ranger toy where it connects into that, like, what was it, a star or a diamond thing? I thought that was a really cool thing, but they never made it as a toy. And it's like you make these Battlizers because you want to sell a product, and yeah, they do sell the figurine, but there's no, Morpher at all released for Lost Galaxy. I always feel weird when Bandai does these odd things where they just don't release something. And honestly, it's something that Hasbro could capitalize on, because, like, why not release the Red Ranger, Battle Armor Battlizer actually in the Legacy Collection line? As for the suit, it is pretty clunky. That's one of the major problems with Battlizers in the suits, is that they're very cumbersome. They either have like this humongous, shoulders. They have lots of stuff. Like in Leo's case, it has all these, arms and mechanical arms. That, they are useful. I'm not saying they're not, because that's how Chiquita died at the end of the series. It has all these cumbersome boots and stuff. And I'm saying to myself, as a Ranger or a person in general, you don't want to be, encumbered by something that slows you down. Now, looks-wise, it does fit very much into the Lost Galaxy aesthetics. You can kind of see the influence of the Lights of Orion, for example, because it has the chest armor and it has like the spikes, similar to the power-up mode from the Galaxy Megazord. I think the main problem when it comes to the Battlizers is they're trying to, make it look really cool so that you can sell a product, which is nothing wrong with that, because you want your characters to look cool, but then they never think of it in the practicality sense of, this wouldn't really work in a real fight because it just makes them at a disadvantage. Yeah, they have huge armor and defenses, but what's the point when they can't walk, right? So I'm going to probably put the Battlizer in D. Now that brings us to Lightspeed Rescue, where it starts becoming like, what is a Battlizer? Because we have Carter's Transtech Armor Cycle, which is clearly a Battlizer, but then we also have the Mega Battles for Chad and Joel, which are also really cool add-ons. Now, in this case, the Transtech Armor Cycle doesn't actually have its own, morpher to activate itself. But the Mega Battles actually use the Battle Booster to activate them. I think what they really could have done was simply had the Battle Booster also activate, Carter's Transtech Armor Cycle. Now, as for the Transtech Armor Cycle itself, I thought it was a really cool concept that you can, take apart the entire bike and then convert it into armor. That idea was cool. The problem came from the fact that the entire wheel part of the bike turned into basically nothing, and it was just stuck on the back of the Ranger, making it another more impractical design. Now, again, this is Power Rangers. You can do almost virtually anything within reason of, moving parts around. So you can shrink parts, separate parts into smaller parts. So the scaling factor didn't really have to be an issue. If I was going to redesign the Transtech Armor Cycle to be more of a practical use, the tires either would have been completely removed from the gear and it would have just been separated into like, shoulder armor and stuff to be much smaller, or shrink down the tires and act like either, kind of like, weapons either as a defensive shield or, something that you can shoot out from like a launcher or something. That way you didn't have this gigantic thing on the back of the actor, because you can clearly see it's very difficult to move in it. So they didn't have him move often. They probably had to have it on cables. I do like it more than Leo's, but not by much. Now, as for the Mega Battles, yes, they have giant cannons and stuff that they go on, but it's much easier to deal with, which you can see in the fights, because Joel and Chad can do a lot more fights. Now, they are limited in their movements because they have this giant armor stuff on their right arm, but at least, it has more practical stuff. It, kind of combined it like what Leo and Carter's Battlizers into one thing where they can use this. So it really did in a much better improvement overall to it. Much more compact. I did like the actual straps that they used on the Mega Battles versus, Carter's, like just, plop them on top of him. I'm going to give definitely this one a A. I did really like the Mega Battles. Next up, we go into Time Force, which is another problem. Then we have basically two Red Rangers. We have Wes and Eric. Everyone counts them as Red Rangers. He's the sixth. I prefer him really as a sixth. He doesn't really count as a Red Ranger, but they both got Battlizers. And as usual, they did not make a toy exclusive Battlizer for them. The designs for them are extremely random. They really do not fit into the theme of, time travel. It's this whole night thing, and I get it, it's based on the character he got it from, but again, it's like it should kind of feel the aesthetics of the show, so it kind of feels like this medieval thing, so it's very odd. I think I would have liked it more if it was, say, Wes had gone back in time to, say, King Arthur. Just as an example, you wanted this medieval look, but then like combine the magic element with the Time Force future element into one, and I think it would have worked better in that sense. But since it heavily relies on fire and more a medieval look, it clashes with the futuristic look. And ironically, the fire works more with Eric in that sense, because Eric's in Time Ranger, he was called Time Fire, so his motif was fire. So I think Wes's armor would have worked better on Eric, while Eric's armor would have worked better on Wes. Even though Eric's armor is also a very bizarre design, it has skates and stuff, and you know his hands really can't be used when he's in his flight mode. So again, it's this weird issue of thinking of what it looks like versus being practical in an actual battle. Wes is more practical, at least, even though it has a gigantic sword. At least he can still fight and function in a fight compared to like Carter and whatnot. So at least they're learning compared to what happened in the previous Battlizers where it was huge and cumbersome. They shrunk it down so it works more with the performers. I'm going to give both of them a C. Next up is the Wild Force Animarium armor, and this was like kind of the first time we came back to a buckle morpher. As for the morpher, it's a fairly simple toy. It simply opens up and has a couple of sound effects and lights. That was really it. It's not bad. I wish it did a little bit more stuff. Either have, actor voices, additional sound effects, because, the Animarium armor has like two different modes. It has the, armor, and then it has a defensive mode, which it doubles as also a flight mode as well. And of course, it's based off the Falcon's War, which I thought was a really good idea. Now, finally, no more bulkiness. You can actually have the Superformer fight properly in the suit. Overall, I do like the Animarium armor. So I'm going to put it definitely in a A. I think it was a really good mixture from Zord functions to, practical suit functions. Next up is Shane's Morpher. I think everyone who knows me knows that, I love the story of how he got it, because it's a personal story to Shane. While, all the other battles, okay, be fair, Leo's one was kind of dumb because it was a personal story to Corone, but then Leo gets the Battlizer. I was like, thank you for kind of wrapping up Corone's, what happened to her story, but why did you tie it into his Battlizer? Because, frankly, the Battlizer should have been given to Corone, because she's the one who did everything. I never understood that idea of why they did that. It should have been Leo's story and not Corone's story. But in Shane's case, it was his personal story, and, it was a person of sacrifice, because it was an alien being that got on Earth, saw that Shane was trying to help her out, and then she died. But one of her final things was to grant him this great power. And the second thing that I really liked about it was that it was probably one of the few times that the toy team actually designed a really unique morpher that was not just a simple crummy repaint of the existing morpher on there. So they continued that line. Like, they thought of everything. It wasn't just like, oh, we'll take an element from here. Everything pretty much has its own original design. Even the power disc has its own design. And it would have been kind of cool if they were able to use that power disc into other functions that we could have seen expand on. Like, what would have happened if you put it inside the Megazord or another weapon? It would have been kind of cool if they would have went on to it. So aesthetic-wise, I think it was cool because it has two different modes. So one, it gives you much more mobility while you're fighting. And then, of course, it has its flight mode, which has its, beam finisher attack, which was cool. I think it was much more handled well, and I will definitely give this one an A for both the toy and the practical suit. Next up brings us to Dino Thunder and Dino Thunder's Dragon Yo-Yo. The Morpher is okay. It's ironically the only way we can ever get the Cyracto headplate anywhere, because for whatever reason, Alba Ranger did not make the Cyracto headplate, and they were pretty good when it came to headplates. Everything basically got a headplate, and they got also like the exclusive, Alba Ray Max gold headplates. Then there's like different countries had silver ones and all these other things. But as for like all the other stuff of the Battlizer, it's just a simple repaint of the Thundersaurus Morpher. As for the Battlizer suit itself, again, they made it compact, so it's not like crazy design where bulky and the actor can't fight and stuff. I think, like everyone else says, I didn't like the whole extendo arms and legs. Again, everyone always makes, points at it, like this is Inspector Gadget, Dragon Yo-Yo. Everyone makes fun of the finisher because it was very odd. It doesn't fit anywhere. It's just like, it's not Dino themed. It would have fit more like, say, in Wild Force with, the Armadillo Zord, for example. Like, if you had a Zord that can roll up into a ball, it would have made more sense. I think if they had stolen more elements from the Mezzodon Megazord, either like the combining, like the Triassic mode, and you had like additional add-ons from like based off like the Ankylozord as a shield or something like that, or the chopping things. I think that would have been what would have made it more cooler. But because they went in this whole Inspector Gadget direction, I really didn't like it at all. So I'm going to give it for D. I'd love to give it more for the head plate, but since the head plate is really not important, D. Next up is SPD. Now we're going to start getting into the whole Battlizers got lazy, and they're just simply repaints of the 6th Ranger Morpher, which unfortunately they did. And I was like, oh, that's very disappointing. But it's just like, why? Like, you go out of your way to make a kind of a really unique suit, because the suit in the show is okay. I think some people always make fun of it because it's like, Thong Ranger and this and that. It has all these 3 different modes, and it's like the first Battlizer that Japan took. They slightly modified it, but they did take it, and they did use it in Super Sentai. So I was like, that was cool. I did like the suit in general. All the modes, cyber mode, flight mode, whatever. The only thing that I thought was weird, it's just like, it's from Rick, and he explodes into parts. I always thought that was weird. I never really cared for merging 2 different things. Unfortunately, when it comes to Battlizer, because the Battlizer usually is an American thing. So the main problem is that it clashes with the Super Sentai material. Because, a lot of times Super Sentai has, other power-ups or things that the Rangers do get later on. SPD is like one of the worst examples where, Jack got a Battlizer, but then 2 episodes later, the SWAT mode came out, making it completely pointless, and they only use it like really one other time, excluding when, Sky used it. So in total, I think 3 times. You can't really do the Battlizer if you're going to have this team-wide power-up, making it mostly irrelevant. Like I said, I like the suit itself, but the toy is pretty crummy, sadly. So I'm going to put it in a C between the 2. The Mystic Force Dragonfire Ranger. Yes, it's the Solar Cell Morpher, and it's just with, the Dragon dagger or whatever they stuck on the top or whatnot to make it look interesting. At least we saw it in the show, but it's a unfortunate simple repaint of the Morpher, so really not much to say there. As for the suit itself, again, at least they set up the dragon in the show early on, so that, we already had the Battlizer. But I think the main issue with the Battlizer and Mystic Force is that it took so dang long for it to be used in the show, because, it was set up very early on. They had to raise the dragon, blah, 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 blah. And I know it's expensive because the dragon was CG, but I really wish they had released the Battlizer earlier, because Nick could have used it earlier in the show before they had their legend powers, because again, the Battlizer was only for America. You have the legend mode from Maji Ranger, being used more often compared to the Battlizer, so it suffers there. I do like its aesthetics. It fit very well in Nick's aesthetics. It added all these extra parts to his visor, so I'm definitely going to give it a nice B. Even though the Morphers crap, the suit is pretty good. Next up is Operation Overdrive. Again, the Morpher is a repaint of the Mercury Morpher. Very lazy repaint, honestly, because, the Mercury Morpher, the US toy, is very crummy in itself. They did something with the cover to make it a little bit more unique to a Battlizer, but still retains the basic shape and everything from it. As for the Sentinel, armor itself, again, like I said before, I didn't like that they combined the Sentinel Knight with Mac, because again, Sentinel Knight is a sentient being. It feels wrong that they did it with it, especially when his face is in his chest. That was like really awkward. They basically couldn't pull off what like Digimon Tamers did, where they combined it, the Tamer and the Digimon together really well, so it worked there. I did like that they did change Mac's base Ranger costume, because they did integrate the visor. They made it gold. It wasn't as like, oh my god. So like that was the good thing. Like it wasn't a huge Battlizer, so he could move pretty well. It was just the finisher with the big Sentinel Knight face and whatnot, and I thought that was very odd. So again, I'm just going to give it a C overall. Now, Dino Fury unfortunately did not get a Battlizer, because again, the money for a Battlizer went towards the Spirit Rangers. So that was skipped. And since RPM was the season where the show was being originally canceled, they didn't spend the money to make a Battlizer for Scott. But we did get the Shogun Battlizer for Samurai. Now, for all the crap that I give Samurai, all the wrong from the plots, the characters, the blatant recycling of Shinkenger in the worst possible way. I will give them the credit of the Shogun Battlizer armor. Now, the Morpher itself, it could have been better. I mean, again, it's a buckle Morpher, so you can't really do much. I think it's just a little bit too odd with the whole face thing, and it opens up. Doesn't really get much to do. But as show armor, I thought it was perfect. It fit in very well with the Shogun aspect. One, the biggest thing being a team-wide Battlizer, which I always wanted. It's like every Ranger should have access to the Battlizer, but just give them uniqueness. That's the one thing it did falter on, because again, the Battlizer didn't really have any uniqueness beyond just being a color swap in the helmet. And I think the main issue was because I bet you the suit was probably only made in 2 different ways, male, female, and then it was probably just one color, and then they digitally colored it besides the helmet. So it was basically they couldn't really do anything unique with it. The only other negative, I think, was that it was mostly relegated to the cockpit, except that one time. But yeah, I think overall, design-wise, it felt like a Shogun. It did fit in the Japanese aesthetic. It was huge, but it didn't look cumbersome on anyone, so they could still walk around and fight. It didn't feel stupid at all, like they didn't put giant things on their feet for them to like lumber around. So yeah, I will give them a high B. I just wish it was used more in the show. Now, some people might, object to this because a lot of people consider like Orion has a Battlizer. You basically have to classify it as it. And, it's a power up, but yeah, it's such a like important power up to Orion. Being all the powers of the 6th Ranger, you do have to qualify it to being the show's Battlizer. Now, it's based off from Gokaiger, so it's a Japanese power up for him suit. Yeah, again, it's a cool concept, but like, for the most part, I did like the aesthetics from Gokaiger / Super Megaforce. Gold mode of Gokai Silver / Super Megaforce's Battlizer, I didn't like it because the helmet thing was very gaudy. And again, it was also came down to the aspect of what the hell counts as a 6th Ranger. Everyone disagrees on what's what, because like I count Blue Centurion as Turbo 6th Ranger, while everyone would be like, no, how dare you, he's meaningless, you have to pick the Phantom Ranger as the real 6th Ranger. And it's just like, no, he's the 7th because he came later. I don't understand why this all became a weird thing, but yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things, and it's just gaudy look. Like if they had dropped the helmet on the armor, I think it would have been okay. Maybe they could have split the difference. Now, if you really wanted the helmets on the armor, why not make it like an ability function? Like, Gokai Silver was supposed to be like this very unique, ranger out of all of them, because he has so much knowledge. Why not give him special abilities that he can access while he's in gold mode that are based off? Because, like how in Gokaiger, they can transform into, past Rangers. They have access to all their arsenal, Morphers, So why don't like do something more unique for the 6 Rangers instead of just like being able to call weapons? Gokai Silver had this like weird odd ability to fuse things. So why not use that as a step further and make him like fuse items or abilities together? Like, for example, he had access to the rocket boosters from Go On Wings. Why not combine that also with the Wind Pendek from Abare Killer, where he can write things and throw arrows and make things explode in a combination with the rocket booster, and so that you can make like this huge super explosion, signature moves, blah blah blah, things like that. I think that would have been more cooler, where he can access that ability from his chest. Like he puts his hand on his chest, it calls out a weapon, and it fuses things and things. It would have given him more of a character trait versus just being, armor with heads on it. So yeah, I'm not going to say it's a crummy suit, because again, it still looks interesting, although I just don't like the helmets. So I'm going to give it a C. Next up is the T-Rex Supercharged Ranger, which again is from Super Sentai. So again, I think at this point in Super Sentai, they started being like, the Battlizer concept from Power Ranger is a really cool idea. Why not like we do it in a more, interesting way? Not only is it a Battlizer and armor, it actually gave him access to basically mini versions of Zord abilities. And I always wanted that for a Ranger from like day one. It's just like, the one thing I always said to myself, the Rangers can do so many things, but they never have access to the Zord's abilities. And I was like, what would happen if you could connect the Zords to a guy at normal size and use them? That would have been really cool. Imagine like the like if Shane or any from Ninja Storm was able to use the Power Sphere system, and you can use all the weapons that the Zords were able to use, but just like human size. That would have been a cool concept. So I'm glad the T-Rex Supercharged Battleizer Ranger did that. I did like it. I did like the weapon overall. I did like the suit. So I'm definitely going to give it a B. Now the Lion Fire mode. Oh, I honestly, personally forgot because again, I always when it comes to Ninja Steel, I forget everything because again, season was overall bad. Didn't really care about the characters. So the Lion Fire Ranger, like aesthetically wise, it works. Again, it fits in because again, is a power up that was from the Ninja. It's a team wide power up too, so everyone can use it. Again, Super Sentai is supposed to be, the power of the team. Power Ranger fans kind of always get annoyed at the Battlizer because, like, the Battlizer powers up the Red Ranger, but then that's it. And it's just like, what? Like, why is that a thing? It's kind of the same problem that Digimon had in the earlier seasons. Like, oh, the leader of the team got, these, next stage evolutions available to them, but the other Digimon couldn't for no unexplained reason. It was just like, oh, we can't do it. Overall fits into the design. They did work it into the story fairly well. I thought it was kind of cool that it was just alien. What was she? She was a ruler of some kind, and then basically, what Red could access it whenever he needs it. So it's kind of cool that it came from a different planet. Aesthetic-wise, I think the English toy, like one of the few things I will say about Ninja Steel, because usually the toys are crap. I will say for the US Battleizer version of it, it actually is an improvement over the Japanese one because it adds additional stuff. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's actually bigger than the Japanese version. And not in the way of like Overdrive when they made the Zords gigantic, but then they looked like complete garbage. So it was like one positive is that it was overall bigger. It had more functions and stuff. So as a toy, it looked very interesting. And the one thing I really wanted to say, even though everyone gives like tons of flack from Ninja Steel being crappy in so many different ways, I will say the box art people, like it was kind of sad that was like this was the last Bandai toy line that they went all out at least on the box art, because you can't say the box art for Ninja Steel looked like garbage. Even though I really didn't care for the Battleizer from Ninja Steel because of overall of everything, I'm gonna definitely give it a solid C. Oh, the notorious Red Fury mode from Beast Morphers. I think, I'm going to go straight to it. F. Period. Because, again, they ran into the same problem that SPD did. They were going to be having a power-up that was from Go Busters. And what were you going to do? You were going to get this Battleizer and then basically do nothing with it because, a couple episodes later, they got this power-up. And what made it worse was that the Battleizer was only used 2 times because it was a limited thing. One, it was poisoning Devon, almost killed him, and it then ran out of power anyway, and then it was basically useless. Not only because of Sentai footage, it got screwed in universe. And the toy version didn't even make any sense because there was no like real Battleizer made for it. In the toys, it was also a power up from the Beast X Sword, and it nothing lined up. It was like there was something that was planned in Beast Morphers, but then dropped at some point in the Hasbro line. So maybe it was something that was left over from when Saban was just producing it at the time. So maybe that's what caused the conflict. Either way, it was just a complete bumbled mess. And, we do have to count it as a Battleizer, but it was one of the shortest, if not shortest, Battlizers. And I will consider the worst Battleizer story-wise ever done in all the shows, at least currently. Which leads us to Dino Fury's Battleizer, which can be used team-wide. I think it's okay. I think a lot of the stuff from Dino Fury is kind of just like, it's there. It's like, I don't hate it. But like I said in my previous video on the Morphers, I was not fond of anything from Dino Fury. And like I said, I always love dinosaur themes. So I got virtually everything from MMPR. I got virtually everything from Dino Thunder. I got virtually everything from Dino Charge. But then when it came to Dino Fury, it was just like, yeah, it's there. It's okay. But nothing stood out to me. So again, the Battlizer didn't stand out to me. Again, it's a cool concept. Again, it's from Super Sentai, so we got a power up and whatnot. I thought it was cool. It fit in with the theme, night theme, blah 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 blah. Had cape, it's kind of fiery armor. Didn't restrict the character, so you can use it wherever you want. The Night Morpher itself was kind of cool. Kind of cool that the origin was kind of like villain-esque elements to it. So I thought that was good in story-wise. So yeah, like I said, not a bad Morpher, not a bad suit. But again, personally for me, it was just there. So, but I will still give respect and give it a B. So yeah, the Battlizers are a very confusing line of stuff. Half the things we don't even get as toys, which is very bizarre. A lot of these Battlizers that I would have loved to have, a Morpher 2, we didn't get. But then you have all these bizarre designs where it's like, they can't walk, slippers, sentient beings going into your chest. And then the most insulting thing is the fact that, they're American suits, and then they get screwed because there's a Super Sentai power-up that comes 5 or 10 episodes later. At least in the longer seasons of Power Rangers, it was mitigated because, again, you had a huge gap between the Battlizer use and, the suit power-up. But because, the seasons had gotten shorter, from 40 to 38 to 32 to like 20, you go right up to like, oh, we have to introduce this because the footage comes in, but we have this obligation of releasing the Battlizer to sell a product. And that's what I think that's what tears a lot of fans because, again, I don't have a problem. You want to sell a product in the show. It has to be compelling to the story. It has to make sense. Like, prime examples. Shane's Battlizer. That's compelling to the character. It has a purpose in the story. Bad example, Devin. Because, yeah, it impacts the character, but since it's so worthless, it's not used. And again, you can also argue with when Sky used the Battlizer. But again, like, it was superseded. It didn't matter. It's like, oh, we have Battlizer? Who cares? SWAT mode. Doesn't matter. So it's like, it has to be important to a character or characters. It has to be useful in the show where it's used more than, 2 times. I think, I can't remember who used their Battlizer the most. Was it Connor? I'm not sure. You have to have a balance of it being used in the show and being useful and not being stuck in a cockpit or just this one-off thing. I think that's what drives it with me. And I think that's what also causes the problem with, fans hating on it because it's just like, what's the point? If it's not in the Super Sentai, you're never going to use it. It's kind of like how Ryan was the first 6th Ranger, but because he was the original character and not in Go-Go 5, he was basically thrown out for a good chunk of the season, so kind of made him worthless in that regard. So it's just like, you want original material in Power Rangers, but when it comes to like putting it in, they always get sidetracked because they have to go right back to the Sentai footage. So it's a blessing and a curse. It's great that Super Sentai has adapted the Battlizer aspect from Power Rangers so that we can use their material into Power Rangers so that the Battlizer can be used more often because they actually have the footage to use. There's more misses, unfortunately, with the Battlizers and more hits, which is unfortunate because I do like the concept. Yes, the Red Ranger is the most important Ranger. He's the leader, blah, 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 and whatnot. But I think, Power Rangers is always about the team. So, these power-ups should always be available to the team. Or at least, like, do what you did with, like, Sky, for example. Okay, if you want to make it exclusive to the Red Ranger, fine. But it would be cool, like they did with Sky. You want to use it? Here, take my Morpher, go use it. That's it. That would be an easy way to go around. And I wish more seasons would do things like that.